This video is about the unrest in Gaza and Jerusalem, which has just exploded, as I sometimes say, and this one is quite a serious matter, so I won't be telling jokes or anything of the sort. I was trying to work on a hip-hop rendition or something, but let's just talk about it. There's the Guardian link in the description to this, and I will not be linking or using anything to do with the boy slain that has been circulating around Facebook and other parts of it. But you can find it through this Guardian link. I could put it through here, but I'm not going to in the description. Yes, Mr. Shock Media has limits. Basically, in my, observer, outsider perspective here, don't trust the Israeli authorities to be straightforward about these matters. I believe this is the long-standing issue. It has been for a long, long time of the intransigence is the word. The unwillingness of the Israeli government to recognize the Palestinian nation as a unique and independent nation state under the UN charters. And in terms of who will come to the table first, I think that Netanyahu stands as one of the largest issues and kind of the central figure that stops any and all discussion about a great many topics that often come to matters I'm ill-equipped to comment upon, termed under status quo. Yes, basically, tensions have exploded to the point where there are protests in the street, and people like myself are not convinced that the Israeli authorities are being honest about what's happened with these two young boys that are now both dead under very gruesome and brutal circumstances, and there's also been a rabbi killed in the number 78 bus attack as well. So both sides, if you look at it that way, are taking losses. Violence is, present in this situation once again, and I don't condone anything other than peaceful, organized, civil protest against the nation-state of Israel toward the ends of the Palestinian people being recognized as a free and independent nation, no longer subject to blockade. And the only way to do that is to come to terms in diplomacy, and John Kerry of the U.S. State Department is on his way there as we speak. Would like to believe Prime Minister Abbas would want to at least come to the table, and I tend to think that that is kind of the fundamental issue here, is that Netanyahu and the Likud party are not willing to do this under any circumstance, and then at the same moment, Bibi, or Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking right now, or is done speaking. And his whole thing is that he's just constantly accusing them of inciting violence. And it's not like it doesn't exist. It's a very real problem throughout the entire Middle East. There's many groups that will incite violence. And that's not what I do. I don't incite anyone to violence. My point is to say things like, I stand in solidarity with the protesters and the free people of Palestine. I have for years, and I don't have any specific qualm with any amount of the Israeli people. It's always the Israeli government that I'm criticizing. And I could speak more on other matters related to the UN, but I will stay focused on the issue here, which is, all over social media. We've had the kind of ultimate shock factor thing right in our face, and this is the person here that's been talking about this issue for a long time as best I'm capable. And it comes down to something we've all heard before, which is what I'm talking about. That in this complex conflict, there's no possible way that anything's going to be improved unless people that are in charge of these two conflicting nations are willing to sit down and talk about it and come to some kind of reasonable diplomatic terms. And what that is and what that looks like is where it's like, John Kerry, go. You are the one in charge of that, and whatever people want. I've long since, along with many others, supported a two-state solution. But it's important to recognize that when you're sitting in the United States, looking at news reports and reading The Guardian. Maybe you saw this on Facebook today. It's like, it's important to recognize, like, you don't have the full understanding of either side. But yes, I've long since been this, and I will continue to be this. The Palestinian people are not terrorists. There's all kinds of groups that I don't support that show up to fight on behalf of the Palestinian people. I don't support the use of violence. That's not my message. However, solidarity is. Those protesters that were out there, 20,000 of them, according to The Guardian, are people where I would be more than happy to have marched with them in a show of supportive solidarity with the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, because this has been going on forever, and there is some kind of much more peaceful, productive path forward, and the blockade does hurt people in those areas, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It does hurt those people, and then on top of that, the just constant accusations of inciting violence all around, rather than wanting to step forward and find a way to negotiate, is the main issue I have with Netanyahu and his administration. And then the main thing in terms of the IDF and the Israeli authorities is they've just been caught so many damn times lying, fabricating, and I don't have any information around on this one. There's some speculations here. You can dig around in the links on the Guardian site, and I could do that too. I don't know that. I do know that there is a way in these really complex, tense, often dangerous and deadly situations. There is a way forward without just violence and all these means as this tool to use forever forward. That's not the way. That doesn't work. That's not the path that'll lead to any kind of peaceful coexistence. And I don't pretend to understand the struggles of either side on this issue. It's simply something I've read a great deal about and have studied over the years, but that doesn't change the fact that I do have strong views on this. It's human rights worldwide, too. This is the element we're dealing with right here today, where the Palestinian flag was raised for the first time at UN headquarters not that long ago, and they've been given a non-member observer status, which is something, some amount of recognition of the nation-state of Palestine. But that isn't good enough, as everyone could clearly tell if they agree with me about this at all. That isn't good enough. They are a nation-state. They do have rights as a nation-state would. Moving forward is the whole thing with the, let John Kerry take the lead is what's happening right now, I would hope, and I do have faith, as it were, in John Kerry to do his best in this situation and try to find a peaceful or more sympathetic solution than constant violence between the two groups. And yes, it's the essence of dissolving fear and at the same time recognizing that people have rights, people can protest injustice, people don't have to stand up for violence and destruction and constant endless warfare in order to have their voice heard and do what I do, and many others do as well. Yes, solidarity with peaceful Palestinian protesters. The UN should and must recognize Palestine as a full member as soon as possible. Netanyahu stands as this primary, central barrier to peace in this situation. He's, aghast at the notion of peace, is my impression, but he's more than welcome to change, his stance on diplomacy. Yes, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in my opinion, stands as a barrier to peace and a barrier to fair and open diplomatic negotiation. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, in my estimation and everything I can see as an outside observer, stands ready to do diplomacy, fair negotiation, at what bounds and what reasonable levels of compromise he's willing to agree to is entirely upon him, his cabinet, his administration. But the intransigent, authoritarian, constant unwillingness to examine the actions of his own authority forces, his own security forces, that come from the Likud party and Benjamin Netanyahu is unhelpful, it's destructive, it doesn't cause anything but more and more and more violence. And that's the round and round we go, is Netanyahu accuses them of inciting violence, and then they're inciting violence, in my opinion, as well. And the big key to my thoughts on destroying cycles of long-time held violence, if it's possible, is through fair, equal terms of negotiation. Such things can happen and can be found at the UN, and such things also can be, at times, conducted by outside parties. This is often what John Kerry and others like him have attempted to do in the situation, and I wish him all the luck. He stands with my full support in seeking peaceful resolutions to this recent flare-up in violence and unrest. And yes, it's basically just social networking thing is like, oh, hey, people in Jerusalem are scared. And it's like people in Palestine have been scared for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. And with good reason, and now this is true, and that's probably good reason too, but it all needs to stop, is what people like me are saying about it. It's all just going to keep going forever in everyone's inciting violence against everyone kind of cycles. So diplomacy is the path forward, is the big rule, and it's not always good and it's not always perfect. And the essence of being willing to not so much give everything, but being willing to compromise and hear the other side's overtures or proposals, what they desire, and weigh it against what is realistically possible. And this is all it is that I'm proposing, and that's all it really comes down to. Come to some form, terms of diplomacy in the near future, then that would go a long way towards seeing less fear in the streets and less, on both sides, violence. Can we completely stop everything going on in all of the Middle East that amounts to violence and amounts to extremist killings? Well, it probably not, or at least not in any recent future, but we have to try, is always my point about it. And one of the best ways forward, I think, is giving the Palestinians more than just the symbolic non-member observer status, and also having the United States government or others encourage Netanyahu to go to the table and talk about exactly the issues in question. And it's clear as shit that there's violence going on. There's dead children all over social media today. So it's clear as shit. And the way how to end cycles of violence, if they can be ended, is to get the people that hold the most respect among the two nations or groups that are in conflict and get them to come to fair and equitable, agreed upon terms. And I'll have a link for a group that does this more directly, because I'm talking on the topic. And as I often say on these things, I don't work for anyone. I have no connection to the United States government, the United States State Department. I am an independent on YouTube. This talk media, politics, opinion, punditry. And I am what's called a social advocate. And that's what this is the people of Palestine are almost always the ones with their voices kind of pushed out of this conversation. And, turning to radical groups that want violence is not acceptable, but it is a byproduct of the world ignoring their situation for decades. So yes, I don't support violence And when it comes to the protests, the 20,000 people, it's yes, we don't agree on all elements or all aspects in regards to religion or all the rest of these things. But I would have marched with you had I been there. Because I've been following this issue for years. And I've been trying to, in my own little ways online, get the word out and get people to know that this is one of the big ignored issues of our time. And essentially that, the government, the nation of Israel is not immune to all scrutiny. They're not immune to all overtures to change their policies, their military behavior, their authoritarian structure. So yes, the larger elements here, in my opinion, are that the Israeli government under the rule of Netanyahu is excessively, if not to just unheard of levels, authoritarian, militaristic, brutal. And what are we going to do about it if he's never going to negotiate, even when open to fair terms and all the rest of it? And, challenges on you, BB, is the way I look at it. So yeah, that's my points on that. The violence has got to stop on both sides. It's not going to do anything moving forward. The protests should continue under peaceful assembly, in my opinion. And people around the world are watching and seeing this go down, as we say in the West Coast. Yeah, there's an awful lot of people like me who don't raise their voice, who are seriously pissed off about this issue, and will continue to be until there is some form of resolution around it. And in general, why does this all happen? It's kind of like talking about the recent UN appointment stuff. But yeah, the date is 10/14, this all happened, 10/14/2015. This all happened yesterday. 10/13/2015, that the tensions between West Bank and Gaza Strip and Jerusalem exploded once more. And The Guardian, I think, is the best article on this, in my opinion, at the moment. So yes, solidarity with all peaceful protesters, all those who support human rights worldwide, boundless of national identity, racial identities, all those things. Just the simple and utter principles of human rights matter everywhere. And that's what I'm standing up for. And the Palestinian people and everyone there have their own specific cause and their own reason. And yes, unrest in civil protest is my key message to anyone facing anything along those lines that the people in Palestine deal with. So yes, we, the few, the many that do, stand with you in solidarity. We want to see an end to the conflict. We want to see a real solution through diplomacy come forward. And we share in all of the distrust and distaste for the Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu, the IDF, and the Israeli authorities in their continued, sometimes rather undercovered campaigns of brutality, which is not a 100%, all of them are doing it. It's much like talking about problems in any level of law enforcement and military structures anywhere, but that particular group, the IDF and the Israeli authorities in general, tend to be the ones that rate rather high in some of the worst ever, according to what I can find out and what I can see. They're some of the most despotic, the most authoritarian, the most unwilling to do anything but, just say that's what it is. No evidence, no need for any of that. Just, you're done. Kangaroo courts. Summary judgments. That's what they're doing a lot of the time, in my opinion, from what I can tell. So yes, click the like button if you appreciate free speech, essentially. Share it around if you feel more people should hear this. Subscribe. Do a wide variety of content here. So subscribe and see what happens. You just might like it. So yes, thank you for dropping by. This is Eric Lightborn, social media blogger, also Eruptide, YouTube, oddball personality, with a socially minded audience of intelligent and resilient individuals. This is me signing out to say, someday, if we try, could find a way to make a better world. And this is one of those examples of where we could possibly do that. Possibly. Don't let that possibility die.